Hey everyone, welcome back. It's time for another deep dive.
Excited to be here.
Today we're going to be exploring some pretty interesting ideas about female sexuality in the animal kingdom. We're kind of flipping the script on some of those old assumptions about the so-called coy female.
Yeah, it's really time to unpack some of those long-held beliefs and see if they hold up to scientific scrutiny.
Right. And for this deep dive, we're going to be using Lucy Cooke's book, Bitch, on the female of the species. Specifically, Chapter 3, The Chaste Female.
Yeah, Cook really digs into how this idea of female coyness became such a dominant narrative in science and culture. It's a really fascinating exploration of how science can get things wrong.
Especially when cultural biases creep in.
Absolutely.
And speaking of biases, I think we have to start with Darwin. He pretty much wrote the book on sexual selection. But Kirk points out that his views were really influenced by the social norms of Victorian England.
Yeah, Darwin's theory, while groundbreaking in many ways, kind of painted females as these passive players in the mating game. Just waiting around for the males to duke it out.
So basically, females are just driven by their limited number of eggs, and males are these relentless pursuers with an abundance of sperm.
Right. And that Victorian lens really shaped how generations of scientists after Darwin viewed the roles of males and females in evolution.
But it wasn't just Darwin's ideas that solidified this view of the coy female. Cook also brings up Angus John Bateman and his fruit fly experiments in the 1940s.
Oh yeah, Bateman's work was super influential. He basically set out to test Darwin's theory in a controlled lab setting using fruit flies as his subjects.
And his findings basically confirmed Darwin's ideas, right? That males benefit more from multiple partners because they produce so much sperm.
Exactly. And females with their limited eggs are better off being more choosy.
So that's how Bateman's principle was born.
And it quickly became this cornerstone of evolutionary biology, shaping how we understood everything from mating behavior to the evolution of sexual traits.
It's amazing how one study with fruit flies could have such a huge impact on science.
It really shows how powerful a scientific paradigm can be, even if it's based on incomplete data.
Which it turns out it might have been.
Mm-hmm.
Cook takes us back to the 1970s and a story about red-winged blackbirds that really throws a wrench into Bateman's theory.
Oh yeah, the blackbird scandal.
Scientists were trying to control blackbird populations by vasectomizing the males, assuming this would limit the number of offspring.
Seemed logical at the time, especially given that prevailing view of female monogamy in birds.
Right. But then they discovered that many females were having chicks fathered by males from outside their territories.
It was a huge shock to the scientific community and really challenged those long-held assumptions about female birds being faithful to their mates.
And this is where technology enters the scene and becomes a total game changer: DNA fingerprinting.
Right. DNA detectives.
Exactly. Scientists could finally determine the paternity of offspring with absolute certainty.
It was like uncovering these secrets that had been hidden for centuries.
And what did those DNA detectives reveal? It turns out that a whopping 90% of female birds engage in extra-pair copulations.
Wow.
They're mating with males outside their established partnerships.
That's a lot of birds.
It is. And it wasn't just birds. DNA fingerprinting revealed similar patterns in a bunch of different species, challenging that image of the coy female.
It's a classic example of how technology can lead to paradigm shifts in science, forcing us to reevaluate our understanding of the natural world.
So Bateman's principle, despite being widely accepted, wasn't telling the whole story. But if females were actively seeking out multiple mates, why had we been so blind to it for so long?
That's a really good question. And it takes us deep into the realm of scientific history and the biases that can shape how we interpret the world around us.
So are you saying that scientists were letting their own preconceived notions cloud their judgment?
It's definitely possible.
That's pretty fascinating. So how do we start to unpack all of this?
Well, that's what we'll be exploring in part 2 of this deep dive.
Stay tuned, folks. It's about to get really interesting.
I can't wait. It's like those scientists were looking for evidence to confirm what they already believe.
Instead of letting the data lead them to new conclusions.
Right. It's a common trap in science, and that's why it's so important to have diverse perspectives.
Makes sense. So if we ditch this idea of the coy female, what does that tell us about the real reasons behind female promiscuity?
Well, there are a lot of potential benefits for females who mate with multiple partners.
Okay. Like what? I'm all ears.
Well, Cook dives into a bunch of fascinating examples, and some of them are pretty shocking, like paternity confusion.
Paternity confusion. Sounds kind of shady.
It's actually a brilliant evolutionary strategy that some females use to protect their offspring.
Okay. I'm intrigued. How does that work?
So imagine you're a female langur living in a troop with a bunch of males.
Yeah.
Some of these males, especially the newcomers, have this nasty habit of killing infants that aren't their own.
Oh, wow. That's brutal. Why would they do that?
It's a way to bring the females back into estrus so they can mate with them.
So it's like a twisted way to ensure their own reproductive success.
Exactly. So how do the females protect their babies from these infanticidal males?
Yeah. What can they do?
They make it impossible to tell who the father is.
Ah, clever.
Right? They mate with multiple males, creating this cloud of uncertainty around paternity.
So the males are less likely to kill an infant because they can't be sure it's not their own.
Exactly. It's like an insurance policy for their offspring.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And it's not just langurs, right?
Nope. Paternity confusion has been observed in a bunch of species, from birds to primates.
It really makes you think about human behavior, too.
It does. It makes you wonder if those primal instincts are still lurking somewhere beneath the surface.
For sure. But paternity confusion is just one piece of the puzzle, right?
Right. Cooke also talks about the advantages of acquiring good genes from multiple partners.
So it's like diversifying their genetic portfolio.
Exactly. By mating with a variety of males, females can increase the genetic diversity of their offspring.
Making them more resilient to disease and environmental changes.
Exactly. It's all about hedging their bets and ensuring that at least some of their offspring will inherit the best possible combination of genes.
And it's not just about disease resistance either, right?
No, mating with multiple males can also lead to increased offspring size strength, even intelligence.
So it's not just about quantity, it's about quality too.
Right. The females are playing the long game, ensuring the success of their lineage.
Fascinating. And then there's the issue of fertilization success.
Oh, yeah. In some species, sperm quality can vary a lot between males.
So by mating with multiple partners, females increase the chances of being fertilized by the most viable sperm.
Exactly, like they're setting up a competition.
Survival of the fittest sperm.
Exactly. And this is where Cooke brings up a really interesting point about testicle size.
Testicle size. How does that fit into all of this?
Well, it turns out that testicle size is a pretty reliable indicator of female promiscuity in the species.
Wait, really? I never would have guessed that.
Yeah, it's true. Cooke uses the example of gorillas and chimpanzees.
Okay.
So gorillas, despite their size, have relatively small testicles.
Interesting.
And that's because gorilla females are typically monogamous, so there's not much sperm competition.
So the males don't need to produce tons of sperm to compete.
Exactly. But chimpanzees, on the other hand, well, they're known for their, shall we say, active social lives.
Yeah, I've heard a thing or two about chimpanzees.
And female chimpanzees mate with multiple males, which leads to intense sperm competition.
So the males have to up their game.
Right. They've evolved much larger testicles to keep up with the demand.
So the more promiscuous the females, the larger the males' testicles.
It's like an evolutionary arms race driven by female choice.
That's wild.
Mm.
It really challenges that old assumption that sperm is cheap and that males have unlimited reproductive capacity.
It does. Sperm production is actually quite costly in terms of energy and resources.
Wow. So those large testicles are a testament to the power of female promiscuity.
They really are. The females are calling the shots, driving the evolution of male anatomy.
This is all so fascinating. But it kind of makes me wonder about Bateman's principle. If females are so actively engaged in choosing their mates and driving sperm competition, how does that fit with his conclusion that females don't benefit from multiple matings?
That's a great question. And that's where the work of Patricia Gawadi comes in.
Oh yeah, I've heard of her. What did she find?
Well, Gawadi has spent a lot of her career challenging Bateman's paradigm, and she's uncovered some pretty compelling evidence that his conclusions might not be as solid as we once thought.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, Gawadi re-examined Bateman's original data and found some flaws in his methodology.
So his experiment wasn't perfect.
Right. For example, Bateman didn't account for the possibility that some offspring might die because they inherited harmful mutations from both parents.
Oh, I see. So he might have underestimated the number of offspring produced by females who mated with multiple males.
Exactly. And there's more. Gawadi also discovered that Bateman selectively presented his data, focusing on the results that supported his hypothesis and ignoring others that didn't.
So it's not just that his methods were flawed. He might have also cherry-picked the data to fit his preconceived notions.
It definitely seems that way. It's a cautionary tale about the importance of scientific rigor and the dangers of confirmation bias.
For sure. So we've been talking a lot about the evolutionary benefits of female promiscuity. But what about the whole idea of the female orgasm?
Ah, yes, that's a topic that has sparked a lot of debate.
Especially since for decades, the existence and purpose of the female orgasm in non-human animals was downplayed or even denied by many scientists.
Yeah, it's almost like they couldn't fathom the idea that female animals might experience pleasure for pleasure's sake.
Right. As if it somehow threatened the established narrative of male dominance.
It's another example of how cultural biases can influence scientific inquiry.
But Cooke argues that there's growing evidence that the female orgasm is not just a human phenomenon.
Right. She says it's a widespread adaptation that plays a significant role in sexual behavior for many animals.
So not just some evolutionary leftover.
Exactly. And Cooke cites research on primates that suggests that females in species with multi-male mating systems tend to have more prominent and sensitive clitorises.
Interesting. So the female orgasm could be an adaptation that encourages females to mate with multiple partners.
That's one theory. And it reinforces the idea that female sexuality is a powerful force that's been shaped by evolution, just like any other aspect of biology.
It's like we're finally starting to appreciate the full complexity of female sexuality.
Exactly. And Cooke doesn't just focus on primates. She takes us on this incredible tour of the animal kingdom, showcasing all these different female mating strategies.
Like those fish where the females are the ones with the flashy colors and elaborate courtship displays.
Exactly. It's a great example of how evolution can lead to these role reversals that challenge our traditional views of male and female behavior.
It's like nature saying, hey, there's no one-size-fits-all model for sexuality. It's all about what works best in a given environment.
Exactly. And that brings us back to Cooke's main argument, that the idea of the coy female is not just inaccurate, it's harmful.
Because it limits our understanding of the vast spectrum of female behavior.
Right. It's like we've been looking at the world with blinders on missing out on all the incredible complexity and beauty of female sexuality.
And on that note, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. What do you say we pick up where we left off in part 3?
Sounds good to me.
Awesome. We'll see you all there. We've spent centuries trying to fit female behavior into this box labeled coy, and it's just not that simple.
It really isn't. It's like trying to force a river to flow in a straight line. You're going to lose a lot of its natural power and beauty that way.
And speaking of power, one of the things that really stood out to me in Cooke's book is how she reframes female sexuality as a source of power.
Yeah, not just biologically, but in terms of social dynamics, too.
Exactly. For too long, female sexuality has been viewed through this lens of control and suppression. But Cooke argues that it can actually be a force that females use to their advantage.
Right. They can shape their environment and influence the behavior of those around them.
She even talks about how female promiscuity can actually drive the evolution of male traits.
Like those larger testicles we talked about?
Right. It's not just males competing for access to females.
Yeah.
Females are also playing an active role in shaping evolution through their mating choices.
It's this dynamic interplay between the sexes, and females might be holding more cards than we realize.
It's like we're finally acknowledging that females are not just passive objects, but active agents in their own lives.
Absolutely. And this has implications not just for how we understand nature, but also how we view ourselves and our relationships.
I mean, if we accept that female promiscuity is a natural and adaptive strategy in the animal kingdom, it makes you wonder how much of our own behavior is shaped by evolution.
It's a really interesting question, and Cooke's book definitely gives us a lot to think about. It challenges us to look beyond those cultural narratives that often dictate how we think about sexuality, and to consider the possibility that our behavior might be influenced by factors we're not even aware of.
It's like she's opening up a whole new way of understanding ourselves and our place in the world.
And this conversation is so important right now, especially when traditional gender roles are being challenged and redefined. Cooke's work gives us a really valuable framework for understanding the biological and evolutionary roots of these changes.
It's not about saying that biology is destiny, but that we need to acknowledge the full spectrum of human behavior, even the parts that make us uncomfortable.
Exactly. It's about embracing the complexity of life and recognizing that there's no one right way to be male or female. We're all part of this incredible evolutionary experiment. And the more we learn about the diversity of life, the more we learn about ourselves.
So to our listeners out there, we encourage you to keep exploring this topic. Dive into Cooke's book, Bitch, on the female of the species. Challenge your assumptions and be open to new ways of seeing the world.
Because the more we understand about the females of all species, the more we understand about the incredible tapestry of life and our own place within it.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the world of female sexuality. We hope you found it as fascinating and thought-provoking as we did. Until next time, keep those minds curious